My mother's voice was calm when she said it, almost rehearsed. "Sweetheart, we've already given enough over the years. Your brother's wedding was different. He needed the help. You've always been so capable." I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I'd studied for the SAT while my brother played video games downstairs. The same room where I'd filled out college applications alone while my parents helped him with his homework. I'd just asked if they could contribute something, anything, toward my wedding. Not $120,000 like they'd spent on my brother's destination ceremony in Cabo 2 years earlier. Not even half that. Just something. A gesture. An acknowledgement that I mattered too. My mother smiled and patted my hand. "You understand, don't you? You've always been the responsible one." I looked at her. At my father reading his newspaper like this conversation wasn't happening. At the family photos on the wall where my brother's achievements took up 3 times the space of mine. "Yes," I said quietly. "I understand perfectly." And I did. For the first time in 31 years, I understood exactly who I was to them. The backup plan, the safety net. The one who handled things so they could focus on what really mattered. My brother Brandon, their golden child. 3 years later, my father called me on a Tuesday evening. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Shaky. Scared. "Melissa, we need to talk. It's about the house. The mortgage. We're behind. 4 months behind. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We need you to cover the payments until we get back on our feet. You've been paying for 2 years anyway. We just need a little more time." I was standing in the kitchen of the home I owned outright, the one I'd bought with cash after selling my tech startup for 7 figures. My husband Derek was making dinner, glancing at me with concern. I let my father's words hang in the air. Then I said, "No." The silence on the other end was deafening. "What do you mean, no?" he finally asked. "I mean, no. I'm not paying your mortgage anymore. I stopped the payment 6 months ago." "You what?" His voice cracked. "But we thought." The bank said the payments were coming in until... They were. From my account. The account I closed in January. I assumed you'd notice eventually. Guess you didn't check until the foreclosure notice arrived. "Melissa, we could lose the house." "I know," I said. "Maybe Brandon can help. He had a $120,000 wedding. Surely he has something saved." I hung up. My hands weren't even shaking. "Let me take you back. Because this story isn't about a wedding or a mortgage. It's about spending 30 years being the responsible one while watching your family pour everything into someone else, and finally realizing that your reliability isn't respected. It's exploited. If you've ever worked twice as hard for half the recognition, if you've ever been told you don't need help because you've proven you can survive without it, if you've ever watched a sibling get handed everything while you scraped for scraps, this story is for you." Brandon was 3 years younger than me. From the moment he was born, the family dynamics shifted. I was 7 when I first noticed it. Old enough to understand that something wasn't fair but too young to articulate what. Mom would spend hours helping Brandon with his reading while I did my homework alone in my room. Dad would play catch with Brandon every evening while I practiced piano by myself. Nobody listening. When I brought home straight A's, my parents would nod and say, "That's nice, honey." When Brandon brought home a C+, they'd throw a celebration because he was finally applying himself. High school made it worse. I took AP classes, joined debate team, volunteered at the hospital on weekends to build my college application. Brandon barely passed his classes, got suspended twice for fighting, and totaled the car my parents bought him within 6 months of getting his license. They bought him another one. When I asked for help with a used car for my senior year, my father laughed. "You're too responsible to need a car. You'll figure out rides. Brandon needs his independence. Independence. He called it independence. What Brandon had was a free pass to fail, with no consequences. I got into Northwestern on a partial scholarship, paid the rest with student loans and 3 part-time jobs. My parents came to graduation this time, but only because they were visiting Brandon at his nearby state school the same weekend. They sat in the audience for my ceremony, checked their phones, and asked if we could hurry to lunch because Brandon was waiting. I walked across that stage with honors and a job offer from a tech company in Seattle. Within 4, I was leading a team. I started building side projects in my spare time, learning about startups and entrepreneurship. I was 28 when I co-founded a mobile app company with 2 colleagues. We bootstrapped it with our savings, worked nights and weekends, watched it grow. By 30, we had venture funding. By 31, we had acquisition offers. I was sitting in a conference room negotiating a deal worth 8 figures when my mother called to tell me Brandon was getting married. The wedding was going to be in Cabo San Lucas. 5 days. All-inclusive resort. 200 guests flying in from across the country. My parents were paying for everything. The venue, the catering, the open bar, the photographer and videographer team, the live band, the welcome dinner, the farewell brunch, the custom decorations imported from Mexico City, $120,000 for a wedding. For my brother who'd never held a job longer than 18 months, who'd been bailed out of credit card debt 3 times, who still called our parents monthly asking for money. They were spending $120,000 on his wedding without blinking. I went to Cabo. I smiled. I gave a toast about how happy I was for Brandon and his bride, Jessica. I watched my parents beam with pride as they handed over check after check. Nobody mentioned my company. Nobody asked about my life. 6 months after Cabo, I met Derek at a tech conference. He was a product manager, smart and funny. We dated for a year, moved in together, got engaged on a hiking trip in Olympic National Park. He knew about my family, understood why I was hesitant to involve them in wedding planning. I called my parents to share the news. My mother squealed with excitement. "Finally, my baby girl is getting married. We have so much to plan. When are you thinking? Spring would be beautiful. Oh, and your father and I were just saying we should do something special." After Brandon's wedding in Cabo, we've been bitten by the destination wedding bug. My heart lifted. Maybe Derek was right. Maybe they would step up. That sounds amazing, Mom. Derek and I were thinking something smaller, maybe 40 or 50 people, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I've been looking at venues in... We can figure out the details later, she interrupted. The important thing is you're finally settling down. We were starting to worry. 2 weeks later, I flew home to discuss the wedding. I'd prepared a modest budget, nothing extravagant. Venue, catering, photographer, flowers, dress. $35,000 total, less than a third of what they'd spent on Brandon's destination extravaganza. I figured even if they could only contribute half, it would be meaningful. A gesture, an acknowledgement that my wedding mattered too. I laid out the budget, explained the options, showed them the venues I was considering. My mother listened, nodded, looked at my father. Then she said those words. "Sweetheart, we've already given enough over the years. Your brother's wedding was different. He needed the help. You've always been so capable." I stared at her. "You spent $120,000 on Brandon's wedding 6 months ago. I'm asking for help with $35,000. You're saying no?" "It's not that simple," my father said, finally putting down his newspaper. "We extended ourselves for your brother's wedding. We're still paying off some of those credit cards. And frankly, Melissa, you don't need our help. You have your fancy tech job, Your startup money. You could pay for 10 weddings if you wanted. That's not the point, I said. My voice was steady, but something inside me was cracking. The point is you chose to help him and you're choosing not to help me. Again. Like always. That's not fair, my mother said. We've always supported both of you equally. I almost laughed. Equally? You paid for his car, his apartment deposit, his credit card debt. 3 times. You paid for his entire wedding. $120,000. What have you paid for me in the last 15 years? Name one thing. Silence. My mother looked at my father. He looked at the floor. We knew you didn't need it, she finally said. You've always handled things yourself. Because I had to, I said. Because you made it clear from the time I was 7 years old that Brandon was the priority. That I was the backup plan. The one who didn't require investment. And now you're telling me my wedding doesn't matter because I've been successful despite your neglect? That's harsh, my father said. No, I said. That's honest. I stood up, gathered my things. I'll pay for my own wedding, like I've paid for everything else in my life. But I want you to remember this moment. Because one day you're going to need something from me, and I'm going to remember that you couldn't be bothered to contribute $1 to the most important day of my life. I drove back to the airport, flew home to Seattle, told Derek everything. He held me while I cried, the first time I'd let myself cry about my family in years. We'll have the most beautiful wedding ever, he said, and we'll pay for it ourselves. And it'll mean more because it's ours. He was right. It did mean more. We got married the following October at a vineyard in Walla Walla. 42 guests, all people who actually loved us. My parents attended but didn't contribute a cent. At the reception, my mother told people how proud she was, how beautiful everything was, how happy she was for her daughter. She said nothing about paying for it. Let everyone assume they had. I didn't correct them. Didn't have the energy. What my parents didn't know, what nobody knew except Derek, was that I'd been paying their mortgage for the past 2 years. It started when my father had a health scare, a minor heart attack that scared everyone. He had to reduce his hours at work. My mother wasn't earning much with her part-time job. They were struggling. Brandon couldn't help. He was still finding himself, still between jobs, still borrowing money from them even as they drowned. So I stepped in, quietly, without fanfare, set up an automatic transfer every month to cover their mortgage payment, $3,400 for 2 years. Over $80,000 of my money keeping a roof over the heads of parents who couldn't find $100 for my wedding. I didn't tell them at first. Made it look like a bank error, an accounting mix-up, plausible deniability. Eventually my mother figured out it was me. She called crying, thanking me, promising they'd pay me back. They never did. Never even mentioned it again. Just accepted my payments as another thing I provided while they continued to pour their remaining resources into Brandon. His car needed repairs. His rent was late. His wife Jessica wanted to redecorate their apartment. There was always something. Always him. Never me. I kept paying the mortgage anyway, because I was the responsible one. Because that's what I did. After the wedding, something shifted. I watched my parents fly home from my self-funded ceremony and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly. Clarity. I'd spent 31 years being the reliable daughter, the one who didn't need help, the one who handled things. And what had it gotten me? A wedding where my parents sat as guests and contributed nothing. A childhood of being overlooked. An adulthood of being exploited. They had spent $120,000 on Brandon's wedding, still struggled to pay their mortgage that I was covering, and told me I didn't need help. Something crystallized in that moment. A decision. Not impulsive. methodical. I would stop being the safety net. I would stop being the ATM. I would stop paying for people who couldn't be bothered to pay for me. I didn't act immediately. I waited. Watched. 3 months after my wedding, I called my mother to share news about a potential acquisition of my company. She listened for 30 seconds, then interrupted to tell me Brandon was having trouble at work again. His boss didn't understand him. He might get fired. Could I talk to him? Give him career advice? Maybe even get him a job at my company? I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. 4 months after my wedding, my company sold. The acquisition closed, and my equity stake was worth more money than my parents had earned in their entire lives combined. I didn't tell them the exact number, just said it went well. My mother said that was nice and asked if I could send a little extra for Christmas gifts since they were tight on cash. 6 months after my wedding, I made the decision official. I logged into my bank account, looked at the automatic transfer that had been sending $3,400 to my parents every month for over 2 years, and I stopped it. Deleted the recurring payment. Closed the linked account entirely so there could be no accident, no automatic resumption. My parents would have to pay their own mortgage, or ask Brandon, or figure it out the way they'd always told me to figure things out. I felt nothing when I did it. No guilt, no satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that I was done. The first month, nothing happened. They probably had enough cushion to cover one payment. The second month, still nothing. Maybe they'd dipped into savings. The third month, my mother called to chat, mentioned nothing about money. I wondered if they'd even noticed. By the fourth month, the bank apparently noticed for them. That's when my father called with his shaky voice, and his request, and his assumption that I would keep saving them like I always had. "You stopped the payment 6 months ago?" he repeated after I told him. "Oh, why?" "Because I paid for my own wedding," I said. $35,000. While you contributed nothing. After spending $120,000 on Brandon's wedding. After I'd been paying your mortgage for over 2 years. After you told me I didn't need help because I was capable. "That's different," he said. "Is it? I spent over $80,000 keeping you in that house. You couldn't find a fraction of that for my wedding. So I stopped. I stopped being the one who gives while getting nothing back." "We're going to lose the house, Melissa." "Then sell it. Downsize. Ask Brandon to help. He had a destination wedding in Cabo. Surely he has resources." My mother got on the phone. She was crying. "How can you do this to us? We're your parents. We raised you." "You raised me to be self-sufficient," I said. "Congratulations. It worked. I'm so..." "You had 2 years to notice I was paying your mortgage. You didn't. You had one chance to contribute to my wedding, to show me I mattered as much as Brandon. You chose not to. These are the consequences of those choices." "What do you want from us?" my father asked. "An apology? Fine. We're sorry. We're sorry we couldn't contribute to your wedding. Now will you help us?" "That's not an apology," I said. "That's a negotiation. And no, I'm not helping. Not anymore. Not ever again. You spent $120,000 on Brandon's wedding and told me you'd already given enough. Okay. You've already taken enough from me. We're done." "What did they do for me, Brandon? Specifically. Name something they paid for. Something they sacrificed for. One thing." He was quiet. "That's what I thought," I said. "They spent $120,000 on your wedding. They spent zero on mine. They spent 20 years investing in you and telling me to figure it out. Now I'm telling them the same thing. Figure it out." "You're being vindictive," he said. "I'm being fair. There's a difference." My aunt called. My grandmother called. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about my cruelty. The family narrative was clear. Melissa was rich. Melissa was heartless. Melissa was letting her elderly parents become homeless over a grudge. Nobody mentioned the $120,000 wedding. Nobody mentioned that I'd paid their mortgage for 2 years. Nobody mentioned that they'd contributed nothing to my wedding after spending 6 figures on Brandon's. Just that I was cruel and they were victims. I did something I'd never done before. I wrote a detailed accounting of every dollar my parents had spent on Brandon versus me over the past 15 years. His cars, apartments, credit card bailouts, wedding, versus my nothing. I posted it on Facebook with no commentary. Just numbers. Just facts. Then I logged off. The comments exploded. Family members who'd been calling me cruel suddenly went quiet. My aunt deleted her sympathetic post. My cousin messaged privately. I had no idea. That's insane. My grandmother called to apologize. I didn't know the full picture. Your mother never mentioned the wedding costs or that you were paying their mortgage. Of course she didn't, I said. That would make them look bad. Brandon called again. This time his voice was different. Defensive. You didn't have to post that. You made us all look bad. The truth made you look bad, I said. I just provided receipts. Mom and Dad helped me because I needed it. You didn't need it. You were always fine. I needed it too, I said. I just learned not to ask because asking meant being disappointed. The difference between us isn't that you needed more. It's that they chose to give you more. They chose to prioritize you. They chose to spend 6 figures on your wedding and 0 on mine. That was a choice. And this is mine. 2 months later, my parents sold the house. They couldn't afford the payments, couldn't get another loan, couldn't find the money anywhere. They downsized to a small apartment in a cheaper part of town. My mother called to tell me, her voice flat and tired. We closed on the house yesterday. 42 years of memories. Gone. I'm sorry, I said. And I meant it. I was sorry they were hurting. I just wasn't sorry enough to keep lighting myself on fire to keep them warm. We could have kept it if you'd helped, she said. You could have kept it if you'd treated me equally, I said. If you'd contributed to my wedding. If you'd noticed who was paying your mortgage. If you'd ever, once, prioritized me over Brandon. But you didn't. So here we are. She hung up. We didn't speak for 3 months after that. The silence was strange. I'd spent 30 years seeking their approval, their attention, their acknowledgement that I mattered. Now I had none of it and I felt lighter than I ever had. Derek and I bought a house in Bellevue, paid cash, started talking about kids. I'd built a life that was entirely mine, funded by my work, shaped by my choices, free of the weight of being the responsible daughter who gave everything and received nothing. Brandon reached out eventually, not to yell, to apologize. Sort of. I didn't realize how different it was for you, he said. I always thought you just didn't want their help, that you were too proud. I wanted their help, I said. I wanted to matter as much as you did. But I learned early that I didn't, so I stopped waiting and started building. I wasted a lot of what they gave me, he admitted. I know. And now you're going to have to build too. It's not too late. He was quiet. Do you hate me? No, but I'm not interested in a close relationship right now. Maybe that changes. Maybe it doesn't. But I'm not going to pretend the last 30 years didn't happen. My parents and I have a surface relationship now. We talk on holidays, exchange birthday cards. They've never apologized for the wedding disparity, never acknowledged what they did. They just act like the foreclosure was bad luck, like the mortgage situation was a mystery, like I'm the difficult daughter who holds grudges. I've stopped expecting more. Stopped hoping they'll see me. I see myself now. That's enough. I still have the budget spreadsheet I made for my wedding. The one I showed them when I asked for help. $35,000. Less than a third of Brandon's wedding. They couldn't find $1 to contribute. I keep that spreadsheet in a folder on my desktop. Not as a reminder of pain, as a reminder of what I'm worth. I funded my own wedding. I bought my own house. I built my own company and sold it for a fortune. I did all of that while they were busy investing in Brandon's next failure. My success isn't revenge. It's just proof that their neglect didn't define me. I define myself. If you've ever been told you're too capable to need help, if you've ever watched a sibling get everything while you got nothing, if you've ever funded someone else's life while they couldn't contribute to yours, this story is for you. You're not cruel for setting boundaries. You're not vindictive for stopping the flow of money to people who never invested in you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is close the account, hang up the phone, and let people face the consequences of how they treated you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever stopped supporting family members who never supported you? I read every story. Subscribe for more stories about people who stopped being ATMs and started being free. Sometimes the best wedding gift you can give yourself is learning you never needed them to celebrate you. You learned to celebrate yourself.